A town under attack from the undead.
It was like the life was being sucked out of them.
How P.T. Barnum saved the Brooklyn Bridge.
This is the little-known story about one of the most iconic structures ever built.
And the tale of the atomic filmmaker.
This is one of the most unusual experiments ever caught on film.
These are the mysteries at the museum.
Nashville, Tennessee is the country music capital of the world. It's home to the Grand Ole Opry, the Country Music Hall of Fame, and the legendary Studio B, where Elvis Presley recorded more than 200 songs. But one institution celebrates a very different American obsession: the Lane Automotive Museum. The collection includes more than 400 unique vehicles, including a propeller-driven concept car from 1932, a fleet of vintage BMWs, and the first car ever built by automaker Henry Ford. But there's one roadster here that leaves them all in the dust.
It's 11 feet long and 4 feet tall. It has a shiny coat of green paint, and the entire thing just glows when the light hits it.
This classic convertible greased the wheels for history's most high-octane escape.
This is the tale of one of the riskiest rides of all time.
(1962), Germany. 20-year-olds Heinz Meixner and Margareta Terau are in love. After an 8-month whirlwind bromance, the young couple have decided to start a life together.
Hans Meixner met Margareta Terau at a party, and they fell madly in love. And after a while, they made plans to get married.
But standing between them is the most imposing barrier of all time: the Berlin Wall. Erected in 1961, the Berlin Wall is a barricade of concrete and wire that divides the city in two. The East is under the communist rule of the Soviets, while the West is a democratic state.
Life was really hard in East Germany, and in the West, people saw freedom and opportunity.
Heinz lives in the West, and since he is originally from Austria, he is allowed to pass freely from one side to another, a route he regularly takes to visit his paramour. Margareta, however, lives in the oppressive East and is not allowed to cross the wall. Heinz wants nothing more than to bring his one true love to West Berlin, where they can be free. But getting past the Berlin Wall will be a monumental challenge.
The wall not only was made of very solid concrete, it had barbed wire, it had metal fortifications, and most importantly, there were thousands of guards who were given permission to shoot to kill if anybody was trying to escape.
Simply trying to climb over the wall will be suicidal, and tunneling under it could take years. So the star-crossed lovers have just one option. They'll have to hide Margareta in a car and smuggle her through one of the wall's checkpoints.
When Heinz would travel to East Berlin, he would typically go through Checkpoint Charlie, probably the best known of all the security checkpoints, almost daily.
Each time Heinz passes through the checkpoint, he secretly searches for ways to sneak Margareta through. Before long, he notices a flaw he thinks he can exploit. All cars must stop in front of a metal barrier before they're allowed to pass.
He noticed that the barrier, while it was low to the ground, it wasn't that low.
So Heinz comes up with a daring plan.
He thought maybe if he could find a vehicle that was small enough, he would be able to drive right under it.
If he and Margareta can get a car that's unusually low to the ground, he can pull them right up to the checkpoint. Then, while the guards are busy inspecting his papers, he'll put the pedal to the metal, speed under the barrier, and be on the western side before anyone can stop it.
He knew how incredibly risky it was, but he was committed to this woman and wanted to do this.
Heinz estimates that the barrier is approximately 3 feet off the ground. He visits every car rental agency in West Berlin until he finds the perfect vehicle. An Austin Healey Sprite, just like the one on display at the Lane Motor Museum. On the night of May 5th, 1963, Heinz puts the plan into gear. In the alleyway behind Margareta's apartment, he tinkers with the car to make it even lower. He lets out a little air from the tires and even removes the windshield. Then, he carefully conceals Margareta in the back seat and drives the makeshift lowrider towards the Berlin Wall.
Heinz was incredibly nervous. He's got one chance to make this work.
Just after midnight, Heinz pulls up to Checkpoint Charlie. Even at this late hour, it's teeming with armed guards. Heinz shows his papers to one of the guards. Then he watches intently as the man takes it to the booth for inspection.
It was now or never for them to make a race to freedom.
Heinz hits the gas and speeds towards the barrier. In the back, all Margareta can do is hope for the best. Behind them, scores of armed guards prepare to open fire.
He was sweating. If this didn't work, they could be killed.
At the last minute, Heinz ducks his head and prays the car is low enough. In a flash, it slips just under the barrier.
He went right under it with about 2 inches to spare.
As the car comes to a screeching halt, Heinz is surrounded by Western guards.
Meister popped out, lets out his fiance and tells them, "We made it, we're going to get married," and everybody started celebrating.
On the communist side of the wall, the embarrassed soldiers can only stare out in disbelief.
Against every odd, every danger that had been in the way, Meixner had pulled this off.
Days later, Heinz and Margareta are finally married. And their brave and creative escape soon makes headlines around the world. The young couple becomes a powerful symbol of resistance.
People loved how daring it was, how this man had put everything on the line to try to save the woman he loved.
Today, this mint-condition Austin Healey Sprite, on display at the Lane Automotive Museum, recalls the daring young man who drove the extra mile for love. Connecticut is famous for its magnificent fall foliage. Each year, millions of tourists enjoy pumpkin picking, apple orchards, and horse-drawn hayrides. And amid this stunning landscape is the Connecticut State Museum of Natural History. Located in the town of Storrs, it's a vast repository for Native American artifacts. The collection includes a Navajo blanket woven from dyed wool, a 1,500-year-old clay pot, and spear points made by local tribes. But deep within the archives is the most intriguing object of all.
The artifact is a section of wood that is 6 inches wide and 16 inches long. The real interesting element is brass tacks, which were hammered into the board.
As Connecticut state archaeologist Nicholas Bellantoni knows firsthand, this aged piece of wood recalls a blood-curdling event and a mystery from beyond the grave.
This story really is a reminder of a real hysteria and fear of the undead.
February 3rd, 1990, Griswold, Connecticut. State archaeologist Nick Bellantoni has just received an urgent call. Something strange has been found at the local gravel mine. 6 large wooden boxes buried beneath the sand. Bellantoni and his team rush to the scene. He inspects the boxes and finds they are marked with brass tacks that spell out 2 letters. Immediately, the archaeologist realizes what this means. It's an 18th century cemetery, and the letters on the coffins are the initials of the dead individual inside.
They hit the colonial era graveyard that nobody knew existed.
According to Connecticut state law, anytime an old burial ground is unearthed, archaeologists are required to carefully catalog the bodies. During the excavation, Bellantoni comes across a coffin marked with the letters JB. A piece of the lid remains in the collection of the Connecticut State Museum of Natural History. But when Bellantoni opens it up and peers inside, he is met with a sight unlike anything he's ever seen.
The thigh bones had been uprooted from their anatomical position and crossed over the chest. And I could see that the skull was decapitated to face the other way. I was totally befuddled. I have never seen anything like this.
Who or what would desecrate the corpse in this way? And why?
This was so unusual. I wanted to get to the bottom of this very quickly.
Animals such as foxes and coyotes often scavenge graves, disturbing the remains. But Bellantoni concludes that the arrangement of the bones is far too precise to have been done by animals. A more likely possibility could be that the bones were jumbled up by 18th century grave robbers. But when Bellantoni consults the records, it's clear that the people interred in the cemetery would not have been good targets for criminals looking to strike it rich.
These were hardworking, poor farmers. There was nothing in those graves to have stolen, so it made no sense.
It seems like Bellantoni's quest to solve the mystery has hit a dead end. But then, with the help of his colleagues, he comes across ancient documents that reveal the truth. And it's not at all what the archaeologist expected.
This was stranger than I think any of us ever imagined.
It's 1990 in Griswold, Connecticut. Archaeologist Nick Bellantoni has unearthed a bizarre burial site. The bones have been rearranged in what seems to be a macabre ritual. No one can explain who did it or why. But when Bellantoni digs into the historical records, he discovers a blood-curdling clue that unlocks the truth behind this grisly grave.
In the mid-1800s, the town of Griswold was afflicted by a deadly plague.
People got weaker and paler and coughing and hacking, bringing up blood, like the life was being sucked out of them.
Bellantoni immediately recognizes the symptoms.
Prior to the Civil War, the biggest killer of adult Americans was tuberculosis.
At the time, the people of Griswold would have had little knowledge of the disease. As he digs deeper into the records, Bellantoni learns that frightened citizens came up with their own grisly theory to explain the epidemic. The locals believed that they were under attack from vampires. According to Bellantoni's research, townspeople thought that vampires emerged from their graves each night to feast on the blood of the living, and in turn, spread the deadly disease. And there was only one way to stop them. Hordes of desperate villagers descended on the cemetery, digging up bodies and performing a macabre ritual.
And so when they got into the grave, they uprooted the legs, so the individual could not leave the burial, and they decapitated him so that he would be dead.
Sure enough, when Bellantoni has the bones tested, the results indicate that J.B. did in fact have tuberculosis. The archaeologist concludes that the man's skeleton was desecrated amid the town's vampire panic.
When confronted with death and disease, people sometimes do irrational things to protect themselves. But J.B. was not a vampire. J.B. was a hard-working farmer. He suffered and died of tuberculosis.
Today, this piece of J.B.'s coffin is on display at the Connecticut State Museum of Natural History. It's a chilling reminder of a secret that rose from the grave. Soaring cathedrals, magnificent castles, and lively pubs make Dublin, Ireland, the crown jewel of the Emerald Isle. And exploring this capital city's rich history is the Little Museum of Dublin. It celebrates famous figures from Dublin's past and present. On display is the death mask of literary titan James Joyce, a lectern once used by the first Irish Catholic U.S. President, John F. Kennedy, and a room filled with memorabilia from the city's most famous band, U2. But the most intriguing artifact here honors one of Ireland's unsung heroes.
This statue is 15 inches high. It's made from bronze. It depicts a man wearing a clerical collar, and he looks like he doesn't have a care in the world.
This religious sculpture may be small, but it's connected to one of the biggest rescue operations of World War II.
This man was part of an epic game of hide and seek.
October 1943, Rome. The Eternal City is under German occupation, and a reign of terror has been unleashed on the region's Jewish residents. The Nazis have arrested hundreds of Jews and are shipping them to Auschwitz.
It's a very frightening place to be living in for Jewish people.
But one man gives the Jewish community of Rome a glimmer of hope. An Irish priest named Hugh O'Flaherty.
Hugh O'Flaherty worked as a missionary before settling in Rome. When he saw the way the Jewish people had been treated, he just said, I have to stop this, I have to do something.
Using the Vatican as his base, O'Flaherty has established a network of safe houses throughout the city, in monasteries, convents, and rectories. Every day he leaves the Holy See to guide the persecuted to their hiding places. Not only that, but he also hand delivers food and supplies to each safe house. So far, he's hidden more than 1,000 Jewish people. The hope is that he can remain out of sight until the war ends. But one morning, O'Flaherty is preparing to make his rounds when a trusted informant gives him devastating news. The Nazis have been tipped off to his operation and have ordered his arrest.
The SS wanted to get Hugh O'Flaherty dead or alive.
O'Flaherty's saving grace is a diplomatic loophole. As long as he remains inside the borders of the Vatican, the Nazis can't touch him.
Vatican City was neutral at this time. The Pope had managed to persuade Hitler never to cross into the Vatican.
But if O'Flaherty can't leave to conduct his daily supply runs, the hidden Jews will surely perish.
The lives of thousands of people are at stake.
O'Flaherty resolves to continue his mission no matter what. So one day, the courageous cleric sneaks out of the Vatican. Before heading to a safe house, he stops by the home of a friend to get more supplies. But just as he's about to leave, he hears the screech of tires out on the street. It's the SS.
He thinks to himself, is this the end of the operation? Am I to be shot?
As the SS bursts through the front door, the priest slips into the cellar. He scans the room and comes to a sobering realization. There's no way out. So is this the end for O'Flaherty and his network of hidden Jews?
It's 1943 in Rome. With the city occupied by the Nazis, a Catholic priest named Hugh O'Flaherty is hiding hundreds of Jewish people from Hitler's forces. But one day, he's discovered by the SS and trapped in a basement with no way out. So, is this the end of the holy man's mission?
All hope seems lost. But then Father O'Flaherty hears something.
There is a massive noise, and he looks round, frightened.
At the back of the basement, he sees coal pouring through a narrow chute. When he looks closer, he finds that it leads to the street, where two coal delivery men are going about their work. Suddenly, O'Flaherty has a daring idea. The priest quietly calls up to one of the men and persuades him to help. O'Flaherty strips down to his trousers and undershirt and stuffs his robes in an empty coal sack. Then he dusts himself from head to toe in coal. Dirty and in plain clothes, he looks just like one of the delivery men. O'Flaherty says a prayer and climbs up the chute.
He must have been very nervous and very afraid.
The Nazi soldiers eye him suspiciously. But they don't recognize him at all.
They, in fact, move away because they don't want to get any coal dust on them. And he's free to get back to the Vatican.
Despite the close call, the priest remains committed to his mission. In fact, the episode provides him with a moment of divine inspiration. For the next several months, O'Flaherty avoids the Nazis by using a string of clever disguises. He impersonates a street cleaner, a postman, and even a nun. In June 1944, Rome is finally liberated by the Allies. All told, O'Flaherty has saved at least 1,700 Roman Jews.
People say there's hundreds of thousands of people alive today because of his bravery.
This statue of Hugh O'Flaherty is on display at the Little Museum of Dublin. It is proof that a little faith and a cunning disguise goes a long way. The Washington Monument, Golden Gate Bridge, and the Empire State Building. These icons of American architecture were all made with steel that came from a small town on the East Coast, Roebling, New Jersey. Today, located on the site of a former steel mill, the Roebling Museum celebrates the giant contribution this town made to building the nation. Its spacious grounds are strewn with massive pieces of industrial equipment. But in the museum's archives is one much smaller item.
The object is 1.5 feet long by 3 inches wide. It's made of multiple pieces coiled together and twisted, and that makes them quite strong.
This length of cable is from one of the country's most recognizable crossings, the Brooklyn Bridge. But while it is beloved by Americans today, what few realize is that when it first opened, it was viewed with trepidation and fear.
This artifact is a reminder of a little-known story about one of the most iconic structures ever built.
It's 1883. New York Mayor Franklin Edson proudly announces that work on the longest suspension bridge in the world, the Brooklyn Bridge, is complete. Connecting Brooklyn with the island of Manhattan, it's also the most expensive bridge ever built, with a final cost of $15.5 million.
It was the solution to a long-time problem for people wanting to cross over between Manhattan and Brooklyn.
The opening ceremony is set for May 24th. There's just one problem. Many New Yorkers think it's unsafe.
Because the Brooklyn Bridge was such a long suspension bridge, unheard of for its time, there were skeptics who believed it was too long of a span. And so there was great fear that the bridge would collapse.
If the public doesn't use the bridge, the city of New York will be seen as a laughingstock. But as the day of the official opening rolls around, the anxiety subsides. In just the first 24 hours alone, 250,000 people turn up to walk the epic overpass. It seems that the mayor's work and that of countless engineers and laborers is done. But they couldn't be more wrong. 6 days after the opening, thousands of pedestrians are walking the span when a woman at the end of the bridge trips and falls. Those immediately around her think that the bridge is collapsing. In a matter of minutes, the panic escalates into a full-blown stampede.
People panic. They begin to run. People's worst fears are potentially coming to life.
More than 30 people are injured in the chaos. News of the incident makes headlines across the nation.
People were afraid at that point to even step foot on the bridge.
Less than a week after its opening, the Brooklyn Bridge is almost deserted. For Mayor Edson, it's bad news. Little does he know, he's about to get a helping hand from an unlikely source.
The people of New York are about to see the greatest show on earth.
It's 1883 in New York City. The Brooklyn Bridge has just opened, but there's a problem. Some New Yorkers think the bridge is so long that it could collapse at any minute. Now, the race is on to prove the bridge is safe. And help is about to arrive from the greatest showman on earth.
News reaches one of the most popular entertainers in the nation, P.T. Barnum. Barnum is always on the lookout for new ways to promote his show, and he comes up with a crazy idea. He'll send something across the bridge that's sure to demonstrate its strength. A herd of elephants.
He would march 21 elephants across the Brooklyn Bridge to convince everyone that it was, in fact, safe.
On May 17th, 1884, Barnum arrives in New York and puts his plan into action. With huge crowds looking on, the showman lines up 21 of his prized elephants on the Manhattan side of the bridge. Barnum leads the elephants over the 1 mile span. The crowd is amazed. With every step the massive animals take, the public's fears dissipate.
Although the bridge could have held 2,500 elephants, it only took 21 to convince people that the bridge was actually safe.
When Barnum and his elephants arrive in Brooklyn, the showman is hailed as a hero.
People saw what he did as a way of putting all that he did on the line for New York.
The Brooklyn Bridge goes on to become one of the busiest spans in the nation. Today, this piece of suspension cable from the bridge is on display at the Robley Museum in New Jersey. It recalls the day a pachyderm parade saved the city from a public panic. Geneseo, New York, is known for its beautiful lakes, scenic hiking trails, and majestic mountains. So it's fitting that the native Seneca people refer to the area as the Beautiful Valley. But set amidst this breathtaking natural scenery is an institution that celebrates man-made wonders, the National Warplane Museum. Its collection includes a plane that carried troops to Normandy during the D-Day invasion, a replica of the famous Memphis Belle that flew 25 bombing missions, and even a Soviet plane used in the blockbuster Indiana Jones movies. And there's another object here that was also the subject of a groundbreaking moment in the history of film.
The artifact has white on the front and the back, but the center is aquamarine blue. It's a cylinder, and on the side it says inert rocket motor.
This missile wasn't part of a Hollywood action flick, but some of the most incredible real-life documentary footage of all time.
This is a story of one of the most unusual experiments ever caught on film.
It's the late 1950s. The Soviet Union has just announced that it has developed a long-range bomber capable of dropping an atomic weapon on U.S. soil. The news strikes fear into the heart of the American public.
The 1950s were a time of a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear. People believed that full-scale nuclear war was inevitable.
But the U.S. military has a trick up its sleeve that just might put everyone's mind at rest. (1957), Nevada. George Yoshitake is a 28-year-old cameraman. But he isn't just any movie maker. The daring young man works for the Department of Defense, filming nuclear weapons tests.
George Yoshitake was young and he thought he was invincible, so he didn't worry about the risks that one runs in that kind of profession.
Yoshitake's films are analyzed by military officials to assess the effectiveness of their latest weapons. For 2 years, he shot missile launches, nuclear warheads, and the detonation of the hydrogen bomb over the Pacific.
Yoshitake was an eyewitness to a lot of history.
But the atomic cameraman is about to get his most explosive assignment yet. On the morning of July 19th, Yoshitake reports to the test site in the Nevada desert. There, he's met by a group of Defense Department officials who tell him something amazing. the United States has developed a secret weapon to counter the threat of the new Soviet bombers. It's an incredible piece of atomic technology, and there's nothing like it anywhere on Earth. But it has yet to be tested. And they need Yoshitake to capture it in action.
Yoshitake is going to be the cameraman on one of the most unusual and unique nuclear weapons experiments of all time.
So what is the intrepid young cameraman being asked to film?
It's July 19th, 1957. Cameraman George Yoshitake has an incredible job working for the U.S. Department of Defense, filming nuclear weapons tests. But he's about to take on his biggest assignment yet, recording a top secret weapon, the likes of which the world has never seen.
Yoshitake prepares to film what promises to be the most incredible weapon the United States has developed to date. Nicknamed the Genie, it's a 2-kiloton nuclear missile designed to shoot down multiple enemy bombers before they had the chance to drop an atomic payload.
So the idea behind the Genie was that it had a kill radius of about a mile. The hope was you could knock the Soviet bombers out of the sky with only one nuclear explosion.
In theory, the Genie would detonate so high that it would not pose a threat to civilians on the ground. If the test is successful, the Genie could protect the American people from a Soviet attack. But if it fails, the fate of the nation lies in the hands of the Russians. Yoshitake stands beneath the intended blast site. The filmmaker is joined by a group of volunteers from the U.S. Air Force, who hope they will be witnesses to history. And as the test gets underway, Yoshitake readies himself for action. At 0700 hours, the plane takes off.
The airplane is up. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. There it goes.
A blinding explosion erupts above Yoshitake's head. The Genie test is a success.
There's a real palpable sense of giddiness and relief about having gone through that experience.
The next day, the U.S. military announces the results of their test to the American people. And fear of nuclear attack by the Soviets starts to subside. Yoshitake's film of the Genie missile forever captures the first and only launching of a live nuclear-armed missile into the sky. Today, the nation is protected by a series of missiles designed to intercept incoming threats. And this Douglas Air 2 Genie nuclear missile is on display at the National Warplane Museum. It recalls the daring filmmaker who had a front row seat to an explosive historical event. With its combination of modern skyscrapers and quaint Victorian houses, the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota are a harmonious mix of old and new. And visitors to the region will find an institution that celebrates innovation from the dawn of history to the present day. The Science Museum of Minnesota. Its displays include a 36-foot spacesuit, a mummy from ancient Egypt, and a full-scale model skeleton of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. But amid these oversized exhibits is a small, deceptively simple object.
It's 10 inches long and 10 inches tall. It has a wooden frame with a metal plate on the front with 3 sockets and a gauge.
This box may look like an antique scientific instrument, but it was used in one of the dirtiest medical scams of the 20th century.
Many people thought that this simple device was the answer to all their prayers.
It's the late 1920s. A range of new medicines and technologies are taking the medical world by storm. The iron lung, insulin injections for diabetes, and even adhesive bandages offer patients an unprecedented level of care.
People were fascinated with all the developments in science. Anything seemed possible.
But in Los Angeles, one crafty pair of con artists think they can exploit the country's fascination with medical marvels. Dr. Ruth Drown and her daughter Cynthia.
Dr. Drown and her daughter want to take advantage of sick people and to make their fortune.
In 1935, the Drowns open a clinic where they treat patients with a device of their own creation. They call it the Homovibra Ray, one of which is now on display at the Science Museum of Minnesota. The Drowns say it's a one-of-a-kind instrument that uses radio waves and vibrations to diagnose any disease just by testing a person's blood. In reality, it's nothing more than a simple box with wires inside that make the dial on the front line up and move back and forth. The Drowns advertise the Homovibra Ray as a modern medical miracle.
They said that the device was new technologies able to solve all of life's ailments.
Sure enough, the ruse works. Sick people flock to the Drowns clinic, desperate to get a diagnosis from the Homovibra Ray. One by one, Ruth Drown takes drops of patients' blood, puts them on blotter paper, and inserts the paper into the machine. The doctor tells patients that the device's lights and vibrations relate to various diagnoses, from diabetes to cancer. Desperate to be cured, scores of people eagerly pay $50 for the privilege.
People with illnesses are particularly vulnerable. They'll look at any options, and that's why they ended up with Dr. Ruth Drown.
For 30 years, the Drowns pull off their dastardly scam. They diagnose more than 35,000 unsuspecting patients using the homovibra ray, fleecing their victims of hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process.
The business was very lucrative. Together, the mother and daughter duo made a fortune.
It looks like nothing can bring these fraudsters down. But little do they know, they're about to get a taste of their own medicine.
It's the 1960s in California. For nearly 3 decades, Dr. Ruth Drown and her daughter have been running a medical scam. Using a phony invention they call the homovibra ray, they pretend to diagnose people's ailments, all the while fleecing them out of thousands of dollars. It looks like nothing can stop this mother-daughter quackery, but little do they know, they're about to meet their match.
In April of 1963, a new patient comes to visit the Drowns clinic. Jackie Metcalf, a 22-year-old mother, says that her children are ill and need help. She says she's brought their blood samples on blotter papers and would like Dr. Drown to analyze. Minutes later, she presents Mrs. Metcalf with a diagnosis.
She said that the 3 blood samples were infected with chickenpox and the measles.
Dr. Drown thinks she's successfully hoodwinked yet another desperate patient.
But Dr. Drown and her daughter were in for a surprise.
The next day, the Drowns get a knock on their door. It's the cops.
They were completely shocked. Police and health inspectors arrested Dr. Drown and her daughter.
But how did their decades-long scam come undone? It turns out Mrs. Metcalf was not a worried mother at all, but an undercover operative sent by the California State Department of Health. Over the years, the health department received numerous complaints about the Drowns.
They heard story after story of patients who got worse and some who had died.
So they sent one of their own to expose the dangerous scheme. And the blotter papers Mrs. Metcalf gave to Dr. Drown didn't have human blood on them.
The blood samples were in fact from a pig, sheep, and turkey. This was a classic sting.
Such animals cannot get chickenpox or measles. The state convicts the Drowns of medical fraud. Ruth Drown passes away during a trial, but her daughter Cynthia is sentenced to 10 years in prison. Today, this homovibra ray, on display at the Science Museum of Minnesota, recalls the fraudsters who got a taste of their own medicine. From a vampire's curse to an atomic filmmaker, a pachyderm parade to a drive for freedom.
I'm Don Wildman, And these are the mysteries at the museum.